Welcome to the virtual talk Elevated Paper. This talk is the first in a series of 3 artist talks for the Sustainability and Chaos, the North American Hand Papermakers Juried Triennial. This exhibition shows the work of 29 artists and is currently on view at the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking. We're located on the campus of Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, Georgia. Our mission is to collect, preserve, increase, and disseminate knowledge about papermaking, past, present, and future. And the Paper Museum houses approximately 100,000 artifacts, 7,000 books in our collection. Our galleries feature 3 permanent exhibits along with a gallery for changing exhibitions, and we mount 3 temporary exhibits annually. The changing exhibits rotate between curated visions of our collection, rentals of traveling shows, and collaborations with artists and scholars. Our educational programs serve a wide range of communities and ages. Programming includes hands-on and virtual workshops, virtual demonstrations, virtual lectures. We also provide opportunities for self-guided learning with resources and recordings posted on our website, as well as tutorials on our YouTube channel. So now you know a little about Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking. I will introduce our speakers for the evening. Excuse me. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Neil Daigle Orians, Noah Lagle, Milcah Bassel, and Amanda Thackray, as they discuss their pieces featured in the show and offer some insights into their processes. After all the presentations, the floor will be open for questions. So we ask that you please submit your questions to the Q&A button. Reserve the chat for making observations and comments or sharing resources. Using the Q&A button helps us find your questions more easily. And you may submit your questions to the Q&A at any point during the presentations. I'm going to read all of the bios, and then we'll hear from our presenters. So Neil Daigle Orians is an artist, curator, and educator living and working in Cincinnati, Ohio, the native homeland of the indigenous Algonquin-speaking tribes, including the Delaware, Miami, and Shawnee tribes. They received a BFA in studio art from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and MFA in studio art from the University of Connecticut. From 2016 to 2021, they served as visual arts manager at Real Art Ways in Hartford, Connecticut, organizing and curating more than 100 exhibitions, public events, and performances. They have received residencies from the International Print Center of New York, Stove Works in Chattanooga, and the Morgan Conservatory in Cleveland. Recent exhibition venues and project sites include Radiator Arts in Queens, International Center for Printmaking in New York, Salisbury University in Salisbury, Maryland, University of Nebraska, Omaha, and Alexander Brest Gallery in Jacksonville, Florida. They have taught courses on art, culture, and theory at the University of Connecticut, Quinnipiac University, the University of Hartford, as well as workshops for organizations and schools, including the Hotchkiss School in Lakeville, Connecticut, and the University of Nebraska, Omaha. They are currently an assistant professor and area head of printmaking at the University of Cincinnati. Noah Lagle is an artist and educator whose work engages printmaking, sculpture, and installation to explore archival practices and collections as a way to engage with intellectual history and familial heritage. Noah holds an MFA from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and a BA from the University of Vermont. He has been awarded residencies at the Vermont Studio Center, the Atelier Haus Hillman in Germany, and Ogwen Yush Geppert Academy of Fine Art in Wrocław, Poland. Noah has exhibited his work internationally and nationally and is currently working as a studio manager at the Linden House Art Center in Athens, Georgia. In addition to his artistic pursuits, he is a musician, an outdoor educator, and an avid board game player. Milcah Bassel is a transdisciplinary artist raised in Israel and based in Jersey City. Her work integrates material and non-material approaches for activating bodies across private, public, and spiritual realms, incorporating installation, performance, drawing, and other media. The pieces invite physical engagement and viewer participation. She holds a post-baccalaureate in studio art from Brandeis University and an MFA in visual art from Mason Gross School of the Arts, Rutgers University. Bassel has exhibited and performed in galleries and institutions both nationally and internationally, with recent shows at Rubin Museum of the Arts, Bronx Museum of the Arts, Newark Museum, Zimmerli Art Museum, Soho 20 Gallery, White Box, William Patterson University, Nick Gallery at Brandeis, The Gateway with Project from Empty Space, and Hanina Gallery in Tel Aviv, among others. Art fairs include Pulse and EAB in New York, Untitled and Selected in Miami. Awards and residencies include Acre, Brodsky Center Residency, and NEA Grant. Hadassah Brandeis Institute Artist in Residency, Gutenberg Art Star Residency, Bronx Museum, AIM Fellowship, Smack Millen Hot Picks, Center for Book Arts Workspace Residency, New Jersey State Council, and the Arts Individual Arts Fellowship, Art Yard Residency, Haystack, Open Studio Residency. And last but not least, Amanda Thackray is a multidisciplinary ecofeminist artist educator based in Newark, New Jersey, who collaborates with biologists, ethnographers, natural and found fibers, and site-specific water to create objects and tableaus that inspire environmentally centered conversations. Thackray's projects have been exhibited at diverse galleries and museums locally and nationally. In spring 2023, she was an artist in residence at Brookdale Community College, where she mounted a large solo exhibition with several site-responsive installations. In summer 2023, she is a resident at the NCC East 40 Community Garden in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Additionally, she is crafting 2 permanent outdoor public artworks in Newark, a mural inspired by Suminagashi marbling patterns informing residents about coastal flooding and climate resilience, and a marble background mural about hyper accumulating plant species for PSE and G. She is the recipient of Newark Creative Catalyst Fund Fellowships, a Puffin Foundation grant for environmental art, and a New Jersey State Council Individual Artist Fellowship. She has been awarded numerous residencies, including the Arctic Circle, Svalbard, Norway, the Center for Book Arts in New York, and the Museum of Art and Design, New York. Her work is in over a dozen public collections, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Mediathèque André Malraux in France, Yale University, the Library of Congress, and the Library of Congress, excuse me. She is a lecturer at SUNY, Purchase and Rutgers University. Thackray earned her MFA from RISD and BFA from Rutgers University. Thank you guys for bearing with me reading through all of those, but you guys are quite accomplished. The first person that we'll hear from is Neil.
Hello, everyone. First and foremost, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you for inviting me to this. This has been a treat. This whole experience with this exhibition and the body of work that I created that was ultimately a part of it. So I'm just going to get right on into it. The work created for this exhibition was made during a residency at the Morgan Conservatory of Papermaking up in Cleveland during the month of May in 2023. I have very limited experience working in papermaking using actual facilities. My prior explorations have been utilizing blenders and homemade molds and decals. I proposed this project for the Morgan residency that utilized clothing that no longer fit me in order to cathartically pulp it into paper pulp and make paperworks out of it. My 3 weeks at the Morgan were magical for many reasons, but mostly in how the work changed throughout the process. I have a lot to unpack before getting to the actual work that's in this exhibition, so please bear with me while I get through this. My original project involved making these large-scale wood blocks with imagery based on my body. I had intended to make large-scale cast paper works out of these blocks with the carved information embedded into the paper, as well as print-based work using them as woodcuts. I used a router to carve them, and towards the end of each carving day, I could actually feel the vibration in my bones for hours after. As you probably know, pulp making takes a ton of time, and so I used some of that wait time while the pulp was in the beater to play around with these blocks by hand printing them. I made both individual block prints as well as amalgamous prints, including some other blocks I made based on my stretch marks. The picture on the right of this slide shows the scale of these things next to me. I'm a fairly large person. I'm about 6'3" when I'm not slouching. So in this picture, I'm probably like 6 foot, 6'2", something like that. The entire process forced me to contend with my physicality in ways I was not anticipating. From carving of the blocks with the router and feeling my bones inside my hands, to the hand printing of the blocks and the laborious task of doing something at that scale, and even prepping the fibers for pulping, they all required intense and repetitive physical action. I actually ended up giving myself a bruise on my inner palm at one point from cutting the fiber. I was just using scissors so much repetitively. The shirts needed to be cut into small squares, 1 by 1 inch at most, and then soaked for around 12 to 24 hours before being beaten. The beating itself was also really fun and hilarious, if only because you'd find out just how much residual soaps and detergents are left in the fibers of your clothing, even if you try rinsing them a lot. Before cutting the fibers, I had organized my shirts into color families. This is when I found out that I have a propensity for wearing red, blue, and purple, as those batches ended up being the largest. I was incredibly happy with how saturated the colors remained without any additional dyes or colorants. Just the original dye of the clothing itself was enough to create vivid and saturated colors. To make the objects I originally proposed, I first used tweezers and a sponge to inlay by hand blue pulp into the line work of the blocks. I then used some thin red abaca to make the graphic representations of my stretch marks. From there, I formed tons of individual small sheets by hand and then hand cooched them into the blocks, being sure to take extra time to squish them into place and capture all of the nuance and details of the carving. An unexpected but happy occurrence was some of the residual ink from my previous printing had stained the paper, adding some fleshy pockets to the actual finished pieces. At the end of the process, I had 3 completed what I call fat boy chimeras, and I found myself in a slight dilemma. I had 1 more week remaining at the Morgan and had completed what I had sought to do. So do I continue making more, creating iterations, knowing that I will have just a hilarious amount of pulp left over, understanding how much pulp it really required to create these things, and no proper facilities to make paper in the future? Or do I shift my project and develop it beyond my initial ideas? I've been thinking a lot about the concept of haunting lately. And in retrospect, this residency actually began a major shift in my practice as a whole that continued later throughout that summer. The materials from this project are the physical manifestation of a haunting. They were shirts that I kept holding onto in the hopes that they would one day fit me again. My weight is constantly in flux, but what was intended to be an optimistic goal of holding on to this clothing instead became a collection that shamed me as I carried them with me, even moving across the country with them. While preparing the fibers, I often created sheets of fabric to then cut into the squares by removing the seams of the shirts first. At first, I went back and incorporated the seams into the fibers, but at one point I noticed how spectral they appeared. They became these impossible failures of garments that could not serve their original function, yet still served as a symbol of my body that I once had. With the help of various members from the Morgan staff, I began to experiment with their gigantic mold and decal. I started by creating a thick layer of white cotton pulp, and then added various embeds into the mold, emphasizing the ghostly seams. Once the base sheet had drained enough, the decal could be removed, and I began to work into the still wet pulp with pulp painting and stenciling. The resulting works are sheets of paper that are just over 7 feet long by 3 feet wide and include the seams of my shirts as well as imagery surrounding my body, its various markings, and the anxieties that I have. The process to make these sheets was quick and exciting, but required the help of at least 2 other people. One to hold the mold box in place while myself and another ripped the plastic from the box. I would then immediately work into the seams and get them into an appealing position while the water quickly drained. I always attempted to capture a floating gesture, something that could simultaneously show the expansiveness of my shirt while feeling lighter than air. Working back into the sheets while they were drying allowed me to bring some playfulness back into the process. I created various foam stencils with imagery that was reminiscent of my stretch marks on my belly and chest, as well as triangular motifs that have been a long-standing staple in my work. I wanted to keep the work saturated and bright as to not bog it down too much in the feelings of shame and anxiety that the clothing represented to me. After all, I was essentially performing a cathartic ritual, ridding myself of this shame. My major problem, however, surrounded my dependence to work with others. The Morgan allows residents to have 24-hour access to their facilities, and I would often arrive much earlier than any of the staff. I'm kind of a morning person. So I ended up dusting off a smaller decal box that I found and setting it up so that I could do the whole process by myself. And now we're finally getting to the work that's actually included in the exhibition. Upon creating the first ghost, I immediately realized that the shapes and gestures created by the seams were much more compelling on their own rather than confined within the rectangle of the mold. It was only natural that in addition to pulp painting, I also removed the extraneous pulp from the edges of each shirt as I made them. With some care and plenty of box fans, I was able to cast 2 to 3 shirts a day before leaving the Morgan, ultimately creating 9 ghosts of my previous bodies. Ghost number 1 is included in the exhibition Sustainability and Chaos. I also had plenty of pulp left, and I still do. So before I left, I experimented with sheet forming and pulp painting. I'm still working on what I plan to do with these sheets, including making a handful of books as well as prints. But I wanted to quickly end with my current stage in this process, which returns to utilizing textiles as a primary material. So upon returning to Cincinnati, recognizing I have no proper paper-making facilities, I was still entranced with the ghost seams that I stumbled upon at the Morgan. I was still committed to incorporating the materials of these shirts as a mean to explore their emotional significance, so I naturally decided to create collagraphs on fabric. I glued the seams to sheets of paper, then added more materials such as sand, felt, and embroidery frosts to create textures that hold and impress ink in various ways. I can be graphic and painterly at the same time with this process. These collagraphs are allowing me to continue working at a large and life-size scale without being reliant on currently inaccessible facilities and equipment. The ink does take forever to dry on fabric, but now that it has dried, I'm starting to stitch, sew, and incorporate the remaining fabric from the shirts into the pieces. Getting into this exhibition has reignited this project for me, and I'm very excited to see where it takes me. So yeah, that's my time. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I'm looking forward to fielding some questions later.
Thank you. And we definitely have questions for you. The next
Hooray.
speaker that we'll hear from is Noah.
Great. First, I just want to say thanks to Jerusha and the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking for putting this talk together. I didn't get to go to the conference in Providence, so I'm thrilled that I'll be able to go see the show in Atlanta. Thank you also to Neil, Milcah, and Amanda for showing your work. In today's talk, I'll be discussing my pieces from the Sustainability and Chaos show by zooming out a little bit into other aspects of my artistic practice that give a fuller context to the material and theoretical considerations that I bring to the medium of printmaking, or papermaking rather. As you can tell, or you will see, I'm a bit of a printmaker by trade. These folders you see here are constructed out of paper that I made from pulped dictionaries and are just two of a growing stack of indexical containers that I have been filling and rearranging over the last few years. I call them collected sayings. My research is rooted in an examination of information systems, materiality, and language, and how these mediators of experience are synthesized to construct understandings of our world. My artistic practice is based in iterative abstraction as a means of building a visual language, exploring multifaceted formal and textual relationships through print, collage, and assemblage. This project has its foundations in my exploration of book forms and the personalized indexing methods like Post-its, bookmarks, marginal notes, redaction, and the highlighting of text that we use to emphasize and reassign meaning. While this research grew to encompass spaces like libraries, museums, and archives that stand as monumental repositories for collected knowledge, my material exploration is rooted in building a mutable understanding of the relationship between their constituent parts. Here I'm referring to the iterative embedding of meaning within a letter form, a word, a book, and so on up to the level of the library, the institution, and the paradigm. Something like a linguistic Russian doll. So in essence, I'm interested in how we construct the boundaries of containers. Every word we use is a container for an idea. My initial interest in dictionaries grew out of their status as a container for these containers. And by breaking down dictionaries and making them into folders, these pieces both transgress and reaffirm the lines of delineation that serve to separate, contain, define, and construct meaning. Through this work, I confront the aqueous nature of the boundaries we use to frame narratives, as the constituent parts speak to the endless possibilities and their reconfigurations. As the pages are broken down and reconstituted, I considered the history of the palimpsest, the vellum manuscript pages that had their original text effaced in order to make room for new writing. And as with the palimpsest, there are traces present in the folders of their previous form. Some letter forms remain to remind us of the memory that is held within paper itself, in addition to that which is derived from the inscriptions on its surface. It is this latent form of memory that drew me to papermaking in the first place, as it had already been thinking about, and working physically with the potential of reconstitution in the burnt ashes of my work. Burning in this stove is what remains of an older body of work that I now think of as a failed attempt at navigating the intertwined paths of ego, substance, and awareness. I don't mean to mythologize this moment, and the whole ordeal was pretty devoid of ritual. It was more born out of a simultaneous need for more space in my flat file and to heat the cold studio I was working in. But there's always something magical about watching fire consume and listen to it roar, and I have to say that I was transfixed. In the end, though, the visual allure of the flames is overcome by the repellent intensity of the heat. And in that physical and metaphorical distance, I am now able to better reflect on my position and trajectory as an artist. I have saved these ashes not out of a yearning for what once was, but out of a fascination with the possibilities of what could be. Here is a piece that makes use of a matrix of jumbled letter forms printed with ash as a pigment that has been sifted and emulsified in a transparent ink base. This thematic reclamation is meant to evoke the traditional use of the palimpsest as a means of rearranging the bounds of the page. Here, there is text, but it doesn't serve to describe. Instead, the informational overload of the accumulated layers becomes a kind of visual static. And now in retrospect, I can say that it approaches a visual representation of my frame of mind when first confronting the hell box of orphan type at the letterpress shop I used to monitor. In my role as the studio tech at the UTK letterpress shop, sorting through the misplaced type began as a kind of antiquated endurance test. However, the act of sifting and placing tiny pieces of type soon began to remind me of my relationship with the images I use in my collage practice. But before I get back to the collected sayings, I just wanted to show you a few of the prints that I did making use of the ash as a principal pigment. This next series of monotypes are some of my first experiments with incorporating the ash of my old work into print media. And ash stands as a remnant of what once was. Not only does it hold the memory of its material progenitor, but it can also serve as a preservative layer, like at Pompeii or in the outside of some fancy goat cheeses. At once, ash, in all its material uniformity, functions to allude to both the entropic moment in which an object is stripped of its shell, and also to the temporal ubiquity of legacy and memory, no matter how fleeting. In holding together the physical remains of an object, we are able to conceptualize its continuity. It is in these explorations of splayed books, accordion folders, and analog indexing methods that I began to consider container forms more broadly as a means to inspect how important the confines are to the framing of things like narratives, definitions, and paradigms. These prints function as best as diptychs, where their orientation insinuates the presence of a book without delivering any kind of prescriptive content. And it is with that in mind, with the Collected Sayings project, that I've moved away from the vertical hanging folder format that you saw at the beginning of this presentation, and have instead been making only horizontally oriented tabbed folders as the project has become one more akin to a journal or a travel log. These collages are combinations of my own prints, found images and documents, and hand-drawn elements. I often aim to broaden the scope and provenance of the fragmented marks I use within a given folder in order to facilitate new relationships between them. My ongoing work with photographic processes in conjunction with manipulated found images has been a way of examining the ubiquity of images in our social landscape, as well as my own relationship to their consumption, production, and translation. I rarely use glue. Instead, I take advantage of tape, clips, and brads, and other temporary fasteners. This allows me to reconfigure and reimagine these mutable configurations. Overall, my aim is to construct a logical network of contingencies in which each piece of printed matter serves as an echo of another. The visual cues of overlapping panels at times allude to a digital screen experience, recalling the hypertextual underpinnings of the navigation of these continually evolving spaces. especially when it comes to naming them. These folders function both intertextually, often alluding to the work of other thinkers, writers, and philosophers, and hypertextually, allowing for multiple interpretations and navigations. Creating these collages feels as much like an observational process as it does a drawing process. And it is very much rooted in my evolving understanding of what it means to learn, create, borrow, steal, appropriate, translate, and manipulate. To this end, I have been holding a lens to the impulses I share with those driven to collect and categorize, whether it be at the scale of the Trapper Keeper, the Library of Congress, or Wikipedia, or any of the other intellectual realms we all enact through collaborative performance. Thank you to all those in attendance this evening, and I look forward to engaging with your questions at the end of tonight's presentations.
Thank you, Noah. We'll keep it moving.
Thank you.
With Milcah's presentation.
Hi again. Thank you, Jerusha, and my fellow panelists and the North American hand paper makers community and all of you joining today. I want to start by showing you two images pertaining to the fluid, moving, bodily, or mystery grid, which sits at the center of many of my projects in the last few years and a lot of research I've been doing. So the one at the top is my own drawing. It's a large drawing. I tend to work on pieces for sometimes years, kind of coming and going from pieces for years at a time. And the one on the right is a grid from the Lascaux caves in France. And it's amongst those cycles of bison and horses and other animals that we're more familiar with, dating back thousands of years. And I see it as part of the body of the earth. I've been really fascinated with that relationship between bodies and grids, both externally and internally. I'm going to focus a lot on this Continua series. So in Continua, the realms of body, architecture, and landscape are collapsed into porous paper skins. The skin continua are on a shape-shifting quest through the poetics and politics of embodiment, where forms are codependent, unsettled, and dynamic. Each piece in this series is an undulating composition of interconnected geometric units and comes in one of three sizes: specimen, pelt, and later on you'll see the blanket. And they range from cellular samples to potential wearables to collective membranes for our species. They're rooted in the craft of papermaking, and the work comes alive through movement, imagined, and performed. I'll scroll back. This piece is the one in the exhibition. And it's actually the longest of the specimen. Some of the specimen are quite small. So I think you can see me exploring those grids here, exploring the fluidity of the grid and thinking about a kind of passage between object and subject, connections across discrete units, restless forms without a beginning or an end. Here's the blanket. So you all are like the first people that I'm actually showing this completed piece to. I just finished the photo shoot. A couple of the people whose feet you can see here are on the call today. So I'll give a shout out to Ronnie Gross and Ziv Steinberg, who helped bring this piece to life. So this piece is made out of 1,000 individual units, and it took months on end to cast and assemble. It's finally a continuum and ready to enter into the interactive realm. And I'm going to now take a bit of a nerdy dive into the making process of the piece and talk a little bit more about it again at the end. So I would process 2 pounds at a time of abaca fiber. And abaca comes from the Philippines, is from the banana family, and ensures really thin sheets that are also strong, high shrinkage, and really great for laminate casting. They also hold like the true saturation of the pigments that you mix into it after it dries. And so I mixed in aqueous dispersed pigments and then tried my best to take notes on the ratios and make sample chips so that I could remix the colors later. I was pulling the sheets on an 11 by 14 wove Western mold, pressing them and storing stacked wet sheets in a container. I did all this from my studio. So aside from preparing the pulp, either at Carriage House Paper or Rutgers University Paper Studios, everything else was done in a very makeshift manner. When the sheets were ready, I would cut them with scissors and then cast, usually in 2 layers, around a set of handmade ceramic molds. I'd use methyl cellulose and pressure to adhere the seams. So you can kind of see the chips on the left here with my my ratios, and then in the center you can see me releasing one of the laminate castings. The casts were then air dried and pried off the ceramic mold. Stacks and stacks and stacks were made. Repeat, repeat, repeat. The cast units were laid out countless times until the composition was revealed. So you can see me on the left doing that. And then I used restraint dry sheets of the same paper to make tabs that matched the base width of the units. I'd adhere these with PVA and a custom movable restraint dry system using small pieces of blotters and lots of binder clips. For this large piece, the units were then connected in rows, and then I connected the rows to each other using a special jig that I built and lots of magnets. So you can see me on the right. You can only see the top side of the jig, but you can see the little blotters in place with the magnets to restraint dry everything so it wouldn't cockle while it was drying. And so all these pieces are not complete after they're made. They're restless, they're moving and breathing, collapsing, stretching, sometimes tearing, folding, transforming, revealing, concealing. They ask me, or those that wear them, to do the same. They are a skin or an exoskeleton, individual and collective, with open and closed pores and lips and other orifices. They are sprawling landscapes or villages, dense and vulnerable. They are a place to breathe together in refuge. They are an organism evolving. I look forward to your questions and comments later. Thank you.
Thank you, Milcah. And now we'll hear from Amanda.
Hi. I want to echo everyone's thanks and the invitation to come here and present, and also to be in this exhibition. I love being immersed in paper. I think that paper making is really addictive for me, and I can see that in others' work as well. I can see that in my students' work. And I'm so inspired by all of the work that we've seen here today and all the work in the exhibition. Milcah, it is so nice to see this work that I've seen in person, but never all together. These activated photos that you showed us just now are so beautiful and so moving. And I'm so excited that you get to present them here today as part of this talk. So I will get into my work. I'm starting with a slide of the work that's in the show, and then I'll backtrack a little bit and come back to this, but I wanted to start with this work and say how happy I am that the jurors responded to this work. It's new for me. It's sort of an experiment and really playful and really joyful. And so all those things are true, but it's also true that I don't fully know what this work means yet and how it's going to sort of transform my practice. So I'm just going to kind of muse around a little bit and talk about how it fits with some of my other work. So I'm a printmaker, first and foremost, and a bookmaker. But these days, most of my practice is really handmade paper centric. Like I said earlier, I'm pretty, I've become pretty obsessed with paper and just its unique materiality. So this was a large scale handmade paper installation from 2017. It's titled Periphery, and it's sort of modeled on the structure of the glass sea sponge, which was an organism that I was really interested in for a while and still am. And it uses a netted twine as an armature, which is then dipped into abaca fiber, which has powdered mica in it and other additives. And so it sort of has this really, really interesting sort of glimmer to it. It has a lot of subtle shine. And I think this is a really important place to start because it uses the net as a sort of structure, but also as this really important visual element. And this is the first time that I blended handmade paper with the netted form. And I became really focused on this netted form, or more formally, and sort of echoing the beginning of Milcah's talk, the gridded structure, right? So here is a detail of this sculpture. So you can sort of see the shininess and you can see how it forms a skin over the armature. So around the same time as I made and exhibited this installation, I started focusing my practice around global water issues. And this project, which is titled 1,000 Square Feet, I have been making since 2017 and I'm continuing to make. So it slowly, very slowly, frankly, grows larger and larger site by site. And it is, it's a fictional patch of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So this image here is 400 square feet. So it's 400 images that are tiled together, having this sort of like subtle grid structure again. And it's visible through the interaction of the prints that are made on handmade paper. And they represent different locations. So here you can see tiled prints from Maine, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Benin in West Africa. And so my research on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch led to some deep research right around the time of the pandemic. So all my research was online and through reading books. And I became really interested in the phenomenon of ghost nets and the idea of the plastisphere in the ocean. And if you're not familiar, ghost nets are the idea of nets, fishing nets, and other structural nets that are either lost at sea or intentionally thrown overboard. And they sort of float through the ocean and they pick up other things in their wake, and they can sort of gather life or other debris. And so I started making a series of large paper pieces. So these are all handmade paper. And this one is 81 inches long. So they're quite large. And this one is hand distressed as well. And you can see the gridded structure in this idea of like the malleable grid as net. So I have a series of these works that I've been working through, just thinking of different ways of having the grid or the net interact with itself, and creating flowing forms, kind of giving these paper pieces and sculptures and installations, giving them the feeling of water while there's no actual water present. So here's a detail of that installation. And then here are some actual, this is like this piece is called Surface Tension, and it's using that gridded structure to create these teardrops or water droplets. So this is, I'm trying to, when I made this piece, I was trying to bring the water back into the work, right? I was realizing that the water was really implied, but the water was my sort of like initial and primary interest. These are little experimental pieces that I made, I think just last year. I should know that date, but these were a new attempt to kind of bring the water back into the form while still having this sort of like moving, twisting netted structure. And the water sort of feels a little bit woven into them. So these are all made with sort of pulp painted fiber. And some of it is just really dropped on in different ways. And so I was trying to experiment a lot while having the openness of the previous netted pieces, but with a different sort of woven water feel as well. And these pieces, so I've gotten kind of now far away from that initial woven paper piece, but these were the pieces that sort of led me back to the idea of weaving, right? Because I was really thinking of like, how can I weave these two layers, right? So like if you look at these pieces, there seems to be a foreground and a background, the foreground of the net and the background of the water. And so I started making handmade paper pieces, so sheets of paper that I was strategically making for use in weaving with paper. So this is two different abaca sheets. Actually, maybe that's, sorry, I think that's wrong. I think the horizontal sheet is a gradient sheet in abaca, and the vertical sheet is flax. And so I was making these sheets strategically to use them in weaving processes. This piece is also coated in encaustic because I wanted to play around with the three-dimensionality of it and see how I could sort of make some of these strips of paper ripple a little bit as well. And then I also made myself a really crappy makeshift loom. I wound, a warp thread over a piece of cardboard just to play around with weaving in a different way as well. So I was making these all around the same time, and this is like a little bit structurally unsound, but it really helped me think through a lot of these other ideas that I was doing with these other smaller paper pieces. So this is pulp painted sheet woven again with flax as a horizontal, and this had an image that was on that original horizontal sheet. And so it's sort of broken up and becomes like really abstracted through the weaving process. Here's another image of like a before and an after. So you can see on the left, there's a tiled sheet that has some different layers of pulp. So I'm trying to create this gradient, really thinking about the water and this idea of like maybe, like a cross section of the water, maybe some algae and other things, maybe some sea foam, and how I could abstract that or maybe bring it back, sort of oscillating between the net or the grid and the water. And so the foreground and the background kind of trade places and become, they have a different kind of push and pull when they get woven together. And in theory, in my mind, I don't know if it's doing this yet, but I'm also alluding back to the materiality of those plastic nets and the way that the plastic sort of gets embedded throughout our world and throughout the ocean, you know. So these are the things that I'm thinking of and not sure if these works are doing because they are still so new. All these woven paper pieces were created in the second half of 2023. So and then here we come to the last piece, which is also the first piece. And this piece to me, I think is really special. It's small, you know, I forget the exact dimensions, but it's about 9 by 12, maybe a little bit smaller than that. And I painted with a metallic ink onto this pigmented flax paper. It's a highly beaten flax, so it has a translucency to it. And I painted these sort of reflections on water and these little little polka dots and little netted forms. And I made these separate sort of narrative forms on these sheets of paper. And then I strategically cut them up and reassembled them in a completely different way to sort of abstract that, to create this like a refractory image that highlights the way the water can be both opaque and translucent, so that it's you know, both obscuring but also revealing. And I think that's sort of the root of the metaphor that I'm looking for in this work. And with the way that you know, we dump so much of our waste and our trash into the ocean, and then it settles below the surface. And even though water is in theory translucent, the body of water obscures, right? And it sort of becomes this safe haven for our refuge because of this duality, this transparency and opacity. And so I think I'm really excited to make more work in this vein, and I'm really happy that it spoke to the jury. And thanks again for inviting me, and I look forward to any questions. Thanks.
So I am not seeing anything in the Q&A. Maybe people are processing. You guys had so much good work there. So I'm gonna just jump right in with all of the questions. Or I should also mention that this first panel is titled Elevated Paper, and I selected each of you specifically because your starting point, like you can kind of look at it as something that people would be or could potentially be familiar with. So Neil, you had working with the recycled t-shirts. A lot of people getting into paper for the first try often start with recycled materials, but then you take it, you know, elevate it. Each of you elevated your particular technique. Noah with the collage, the weaving, and Milcah, even though yours isn't origami, it looks very much like origami, and so that I was thinking people could connect to it in that way. But also paper casting. I don't know about you guys, but I know I did at least one project in school where we did, you know, casting on a balloon or shape like that. Just as I wanted this to be like the first in the series of virtual talks to give people an entry point. And I love how each of you kind of shared a bit of the journey. I'm curious Neil, you mentioned physicality, like in creating the pieces. Did that make you think about the work in a different way? Having experienced, like you said, the bruising on your hands, and did it make you? I guess, how did that inform you kind of moving forward, especially when you finished what you initially had planned and moving into the next work?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, I really enjoyed being reminded of my body while making work about my body, and kind of being forced into that through the physical sensations, both positive and negative, and even the making of the gigantic sheets was a very physical action. And then even the smaller ghosts, where I was using a smaller mold and decal where I could fit a single shirt inside, it was still very much so a physical process. And I think as artists, especially printmakers, we can often be like very much so internalized. We can be like thinking about wiping our plates perfectly and pulling the squeegee perfectly, and we're very much so kind of like focused interior. So it was really nice to kind of be reminded of that physicality. But I think something that brought me into papermaking in the first place was this idea of thinking about how the materiality itself could have meaning behind it because of what it is. And it was just nice to physically connect with the materiality as a result of that, that it wasn't just the materials and the imagery that I was playing with, but also the process itself was also lending to this really interesting relationship that I wasn't anticipating. I wasn't anticipating this feeling in my body and feeling the work come out of me in a lot of ways. I wasn't anticipating that, even though I was making work about my body. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question precisely,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was just kind of this experience that I wasn't ready for, and then it hit me, and then I just went, oh, all right, let's roll with this. Let's see where this goes.
And I'm gonna kind of roll from that discussion about physicality over to Milcah. You talk about these pieces being restless and the need to move or perform with them. I'm curious about like, were you doing performative pieces prior to this body of work? And then what does that actually look like? So we're seeing the stills, but do you have live performances or video, or is it simply capturing the movement only in still shots?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And it does come straight out of Neil's answer, in that like papermaking itself has its own physicality. And I think that once you pass a certain scale in your work, your body is sort of forced into the picture. For these pieces, it's really important for me that people at least imagine them as being activated. So that's why I call them potential wearables. So whether people actually get to wear them or not, just to be able to kind of spark that sensation when you're looking at the piece, that you could grab it off the wall, you could wear it. What would you do if you wore it? What would the piece become, and what would you become? And so I see that as a starting point, and I have worked a lot with performance, with creating interactive kind of choreographies for pieces and participants. And I use action shots a lot because I find that they're this kind of vehicle for kind of moving between actual movement and perceived or imagined movement. And so the images that we're looking at now were all kind of done in the studio. They're kind of a lens-based performance. But I do see them being performed in a venue or a gallery at some point. And now that the large piece, the blanket piece, is all connected, I am hoping and looking for spaces where it could be activated with the public. And yeah, I hope that answers.
Amanda, there's a question from the audience. They wanted to know whether you recycled water during your paper making process.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, I'm always thinking about water while I'm making paper. And I think that also really what Neil and Milcah were just talking about, that being aware of your body. I think I have become more aware of my water usage in a similar sort of way, right? Like the materials that I'm interacting with, you know, making work with paper has made me more aware of water. And so it's sort of like propelled this obsession with water in me. The fact that I just was accidentally sort of making paper at the same time as I became interested in water. That's not an answer to the question. But I don't recycle water, but I do like to use place-based water and to sort of situate myself in an environment. And so often I will make paper outside, or I will haul water from you know, a stream or a lake. Last summer, I had a residency out in Bethlehem, PA at this 40-acre community garden that's a part of Northampton Community College. And we collected rainwater there. And so I used rainwater for my paper making practice. I reuse water when I can, but I'm more interested in using site-specific water.
No, we also have a question from the audience for you. It says you briefly mentioned some specific archives in your talk, in their ways in which any particular, are there ways in which any particular archives that you researched have influenced your work, or any archives that you've come across in your research that have had a distinct impression on you?
Yeah. Actually, this body of work I was able to exhibit in Poland when I was on a residency there, and through that I was able to have a lot of conversations with people who had just engaged with the work of Abby Warburg, who is a early 20th century Jewish intellectual from Germany who ended up having to flee to England and really set up his own library in through the law of the good neighbor, which is to say that he was constantly rearranging his library stacks in ways that, you know, to the somebody entering his library wouldn't necessarily make sense, but just the way that he was able to kind of put together families and find different aspects within different texts that he was able to, you know, glean different meaning from. I was already kind of working through some of those ideas, but really in seeing the way that he approached the architecture of his space and you know, the ways in which his ideas have gone on to influence a lot of art historians. I'd really like to visit his archives in, I believe they're in London now. But yeah, just the way that the architectural understanding of the library kind of mirrors some of the ways that I think about the architectural or spatial understanding of language has been a really inspiring way to look into archives in general.
I am kind of mindful of the time. We've gone over just a little, but I have one last question to pose to all of you. In seeing your presentations, I was struck by the way in which it seems that the work, or that the way in which you're working with the material is not like precious, right? So like Noah, when you mentioned like not using adhesives and kind of reworking um, your compositions, Amanda, you know, taking your pieces and then cutting them apart and reassembling them, Milcah inviting that interaction, you know, and the more you work with something, the more the opportunity is for it to rip or tear, or and Neil mentioning you had these items of clothing that you had been holding precious and then decided to you know, totally shred them and make them into something altogether new. Can you guys maybe speak a little bit to that aspect of the work?
I can start. So residue has become a really important part of my practice, and kind of thinking about residue, and we're collecting it and we're hoarding. And I feel like as printmakers in particular, printmakers are trained to be hoarders in a lot of ways. Like I might use this $8 sheet of paper that I've never thought of using before, but I got it for free. And so I must keep it, and it must go to every single studio I'm ever in. And maybe one day I'll use it. And so it was actually really funny seeing Noah did a project where the burning of the previous work, because I was like, yeah, I remember almost burning down my backyard doing that same exact thing. And I think I think about reusing and just kind of interrogating this residue that we carry with us. For me, it's just become a really important part of my work, and I'm constantly destroying my work. That's what I actually brought me to paper making in the first place. I was reconstituting older work on paper into pulp to then create new work. And the idea, it was this project about my estranged dead father, and I was taking like self-portraits and creating new paper to then create portraits of him. This idea of this exchange of his legacy living in me in a traceable yet invisible way, in the same way I was doing that for him, where my portraits were invisible but still present in these new works. So this idea of like destruction has kind of, and I guess reconstituting for me has always been kind of a part of it. And I don't know, I feel like we you only live so long, so you might as well just have fun. And sometimes destroying something that you care a lot about is very fun. I don't know about the rest of y'all.
Yeah, I think I'm really interested in the tension between creating really precious objects and then the sort of seeing these works as bodies that have a lifespan, and that maybe something of them then transforms and becomes something else in the world, rather than them continuing to hold sort of their own aura or preciousness forever after. But the tension lies very often in, you know, works that take me years to make. So the blanket piece is something I've been working on for 2 years. My hands made it, but I had an assistant come in every week for almost a year to help me cast the pieces. And so it's just a tremendous amount of labor. And so even if in my mind, I don't want it to be seen as so precious, it becomes precious through the labor. And then that gets untangled as I move it around. And every time I did 2 photo shoots in the past couple of weeks, and every time we moved the piece around for a few hours, I had to patch it up afterwards, right? So there's just that tension, that kind of back and forth. I want to see it as being not precious and being able to sort of come and go. But then I do get attached to it, and something of its aura feels so important at times.
There's also, what you were saying, Milcah, I think there's also something really beautiful about the act of repairing work too, and having that be part of the piece as well. I think that repairs can actually be, can elevate a work. And for me, I actually, for a really long time, and sometimes still, I really was very precious about my work, and I had a hard time letting go. And it was something that I had to practice, to sort of, and to push myself to let go of the preciousness of work. There was a piece that I showed in my slideshow, this larger pink piece that sort of echoed the shape of the previous blue piece, but the pink piece was torn and worn on purpose. And that was something, I spent dozens and dozens of hours, weeks making that piece. And then I had this great idea that I wanted to destroy it. And I had to convince myself to tear it and to destroy it, because I thought it would make it better. And I think that it did. It was, I think that the opportunity to sort of be unprecious and to destroy something, can actually, the result can be more exciting than if you just left that thing to exist forever, right? Because there's sort of like movement in life in destruction, and the opportunity to create something a little bit more unexpected and more exciting, really. I mean, by painting on a piece of paper, I know what I'm doing, but when I cut it up and take it apart to put it back together, there are really exciting things that happen then in that process that I can't anticipate or do on purpose. So I think letting go is a really great exercise in working with the material and working with like fate and chance.
And Noah, you get the final word to our Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, just as I was thinking about that tension that you were just talking about, I was reflecting on something kind of innocuous that I mentioned during my talk, which was just the reorientation of some of the pieces that I've been making. At the beginning, I was making them kind of vertically, and I've switched over to a more horizontal format, which has really allowed them to feel, like I said, more like living documents, something akin to a journal. And for me, that's been a reflection of, in thinking about the ways that libraries or archives are meant to be something that are delved into, something that's meant to be engaged and performed. And, these spaces where, people's, try as we might to make people, when they walk into places, put on their white gloves, they're going to get little tears. They're going to get little dog ears. They're going to get little marginal, marginal texts like we see in every library book, or most library books that I come across anyway. But those are really exciting moments for me to be able to engage with the person who previously held that book, let's say. So for me, just that simple just reorientation for me has really opened up a lot of acceptance, I guess, of just not holding on to something quite so tight and necessarily needing it to be the same forever.
Well, thank you all. I wish we had more time, because I could talk to you guys for hours, but I'm gonna just put up on the screen here your website. So folks, if you want to see more work and follow what these folks are doing, it's there for you to see on the screen. And also, this program is free and open to the public, but if you want to consider making a donation to the museum to help support us being able to continue to bring you programming like this, please think about it. If you'd like to check out other things that the Paper Museum is doing, We're on all the social medias. And if you'd like to see some of the other exhibitions that North American Hand Papermakers put together, you can check them out at NorthAmericanHandPapermakers.org. If you want to go back and see this recording, all the recordings for our virtual talks get posted on our website, paper.gatech.edu. If you'd like to be added to our newsletter, you can contact Anna Dahl, our education curator. And I think we're going to call it an evening. So thank you all for attending the program, and hope to see you back for the next in the series.